Greetings, fellow viewers. Welcome to this week's episode of the Zimbabwe Human Rights Monitoring Platform. My name is Liam Kanenga and I am your host. So now let's quickly dash into this week's discussion. Youth, human rights and the Constitution of Zimbabwe. But firstly, we need to understand who are the youth, how important are they, and why should we care? Well, firstly, we should understand that according to the African Charter, for which Zimbabwe is a signatory, youth are people aged 15 to 35 years. And this is the most active population in the economy, and yet the most vulnerable population of the economy. They constitute 67.7% of the total populatory dividend. Now, what role does government play in the day-to-day lives of these people, and how important is government's role in the day-to-day lives of these people? Now, firstly, we have to understand that Section 20 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe says the state and its institutions at all levels should make sure that it takes a multidisciplinary approach in including and even partaking in affirmative action in advancing the rights of the youth. That is ensuring that they get access to participation, they get access to education and training, employment opportunities, and also get to enjoy the nation's natural, physical, and economic resources. But let's take a glimpse at the reality on the ground. The youth constitute nearly 2/3 of the Zimbabwean population, and them being the most active of the Zimbabwean population, we still battle with issues of unemployment and high poverty rates in Zimbabwe. For example, 95% of Zimbabwe's population is unemployed. That means the majority is informally employed or employed in the informal sector, meaning that most of Zimbabwe's youth are either vendors, forex traders, tuck shop dealers, and the likes. But those that are actually put hands-on a steady paycheck in Zimbabwe constitute less than 10% of the Zimbabweans' total population, or of their total population. So this is why we would end up seeing many youth being exposed to vulnerabilities such as poverty. Poverty is one of the worst human rights violations in the world. Why? Because it deprives the human being from nearly everything. And therefore, resultantly, the Zimbabwean youth have failed to access education, nutrition, accommodation, and health services. And these are the four most key and very, very imperative services that a human being should not be deprived of. Especially when we look at the skyrocketing prices in the supermarkets, especially when we look at the price of food. Despite them constituting a majority, the youth in Zimbabwe are totally voiceless. The government has deprived them of the access to opportunities that empower them, or opportunities that make them build their lives. This has forced them to resort to issues of self-destructive and hazardous lifestyles. For example, drug abuse and crime. And most of this in context, to some informed youth, is a source of disgruntlement, which is why we have now seen most youth activists taking the matters into their own hands to confront government head-on. For example, Wanamatai Kakweza, who has confronted government over their Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2. We've seen other young people like Itai Dzamara. We have seen other young people like Terai Obeistole, the MDC Youth Assembly National Chairperson. We've seen Godfrey Tsenengamu. These are all young people who are taking the responsibility as right holders to hold government accountable in delivering its mandate towards them, because the government itself has the sole duty to ensure that youth are empowered and youth access and get to substantively enjoy their rights. Now, within the course of the government's failure to actually deliver in all aspects of this right, or in all aspects of this demand, it has actually led to more political violence and instability in the face of the Zimbabwean discourse, where we have seen so many Tajamuka protests, we have seen so many mushroom demonstrations by student movements like the Zimbabwe National Students Union at Copacabana. And this has actually led to a default resistance clampdown on the part of the state towards youth activists that now are being incarcerated and subjected to so many human rights violations. And this is also reflects on how much the democratic space in Zimbabwe is closing out, and its closure being a major factor towards the disenfranchisement, exclusion, and suppression, as well as the repression of the youth in Zimbabwe in general. Well, the situation is most youth are now left in a situation where they're desperate and very vulnerable and open to exploitation, such that they can be used as political weapons against each other. The youth of Zimbabwe are so polarized on political partisan lines such that some are willing to actually violate each other's human rights. For example, the alleged Chipangano Youth Brigade in Bari, led by Jim Kunaka in 2008. It was a youth movement sponsored by the then strongman leading Zimbabwe, Robert Gabriel Mugabe, to orchestrate and administer violence politically against anyone who voiced dissent against the regime. We have seen so many youth enrolling or signing up for the Central Intelligence Operation to work as counter-intelligence and counter-opposition weapons in assassinating, abducting, harassing and intimidating fellow youth that voiced dissent and disgruntlement against the regime. We have also seen many other youth being accomplices and complicit actors within the acts of corruption through bribery. We've had so many illegal forex deals on the streets of Harare. We've had so many illegal mine dealings in the streets of Harare. And what is this costing us? An entire lifetime of fortune, an entire lifetime of stability, an entire lifetime of peace, unity, and national prosperity. So this is what really happens if you really take away the rights of a majority and defeat them totally. You are going to dismantle, disenfranchise, disempower, and destroy a nation in total. Now, to strike a balance, let's also look into the efforts that are being made by the Zimbabwean government in delivering youth empowerment as a right. We've heard of the trending hashtag Amendment Bill number 2, which seeks to actually extend the youth proportional representation seats by the number of 10, right? But however, there is a critical or mischievous analysis that ought to be given to this bill in its entirety, or to this clause itself in its entirety, and that is the closure of the political space to only partisan politics. Empowerment in this regard will only mean that you either conform to party A or party B. In this particular scenario and instance, we mean either ZANU-PF, MDC Alliance, or MDC-T, because these are the parties represented in parliament. And so only parties represented in parliament have the capacity to actually second youth into parliament on that clause or on the youth quota. So that means non-politically conforming or affiliating youths are closed out. That itself is an injustice, and it is a tool of tokenist polarization. It means that some of us will be bought into certain political narratives and political affiliations on the basis of selfish individual interests that split us against each other. Now, in and of itself, that's a systematic exclusion and a systematic oppression, as mentioned before, of young people, which means at the end of the day, we are maintaining a hegemony of old people that care less about us at the expense of our own welfare. Is it really political? Is it really administrative? Or it's just something cultural? It takes precedence from the roots of our culture. Understanding the positionality of a young person in Zimbabwe, or the positionality of a young person in the African society in general. But before that, let's understand what happens in other countries. We have seen young leaders like Julius Malema being afforded space to actually form their own political parties and being acknowledged as leaders and holders of knowledge or a certain voice in society through the EFF and the EFF political party and the EFF Students Command. We've seen student activists being accorded so much space in the democratic discourse of South Africa. We've seen the same in Botswana, where even the Botswana Students Association is allowed space to articulate and advance issues of academic freedom. Right? We've even seen some other former student activists graduating into national politics. For example, Vianney Pambo is now a member of parliament under the ticket of the EFF. But however, when you come back to Zimbabwe, young people are regarded as children, hostages of fortune, societal inferiors or societal minorities. They are branded with inferiority traits because of the overarching instance of patriarchy that says the older you are, the more seniority you enjoy. So it means that rulers or leaders in society are the elderly, right? So when the elderly have monopoly over discretion, decision, and even violence itself, it simply means that the youth themselves are pushed and suppressed to the corner periphery. We have no say as young people. Even today in a family setup, the young person's word is the least to be heard. So it is not new when this comes onto the national discourse or the national question, particularly even in the ruling ZANU-PF party. We saw back in 2015 to 2017 the clash between the Lacoste faction that was led by war veterans and the G40 faction led by youthful ministers that wanted to take over power in the ruling party. And this led to an orchestrated garden coup, or a coup de facto, someone to call it, that was sensitized by controversial elections later in 2018. And today, that question and that conflict between the elderly and the youth still continues. It even goes into the MDC Alliance, where we have seen the MDC Alliance Secretary for Policy and Research, Honorable Tapiwa Mashakada, saying the Zinasu element has killed the MDC. Well, the question is not whether he's right or wrong, but it shows a generational tug of war between the two veteran generations and the youth generation together, and failing to agree to a certain point where the other is suppressed, where the other is excluded and disenfranchised. And what does this actually entail? It entails that a society will be kept in a state of perpetual violence, in a state of perpetual antagonism on the basis of either identity, age, creed, and even interests. Interests are shifting day by day in Zimbabwe. And the radical shift of these interests and its generational renewal that it entails is becoming a source of conflict, disenfranchisement, and oppression. So in parting, 3 things that Zimbabwean youth should understand and never forget are: firstly, they are majority. They constitute 2/3 of Zimbabwe's total population, and that is 67.7%. Then secondly, they are the primary stakeholder. Yes, the primary stakeholder, because they are the most voters. In the previous election, 60% of the total votes came from virgin voters, or came from the youth vote. That was 5.6 million, split among its 2 candidates. So it means they themselves have the sole mandate to demand what is their due. It is their constitutional right, as enshrined in Section 20 of the Zimbabwe National Constitution, Amendment number 20. Then thirdly, their omnipotence and presence. They will always be their youth. They will always be the youth of this country. And a country with a weak youth is a weak country. So if you disenfranchise the youth, you've disenfranchised the country's future and present. So it is necessary for the youth of Zimbabwe to unite across their political divides, tribal divides, economic divides, age, race, or creed, and come together and converge upon a common cause to demand what is their due. Why? Because it is their right. So ladies and gentlemen, this is all for this episode, and I am your host, Liam Takurakanenga. See you next week.